Imagine you're hiking. You are deep in the wilderness, surrounded by the quiet, picturesque beauty of a northeast forest.
That's pretty relaxing, honestly.
Right. The canopy is dense, the air is crisp, and everything just feels perfectly serene. But as you walk deeper into the woods, something starts to feel fundamentally wrong.
Hmm.
The wind is hitting you from all sides, swirling and, shifting in ways that make absolutely no logical sense. You stop to get your bearings, looking closely at the tree line, and you realize the vegetation itself is warped.
Yeah, the trees aren't right.
Exactly. The trees are growing at these bizarre, unusual angles, practically leaning sideways. Your internal compass just spins. You try to retrace your steps, but your sense of direction is totally gone.
You're completely disoriented.
You have wandered into a place where people don't just get lost, they get swallowed whole.
Ah.
Welcome to today's deep dive.
It is a genuinely terrifying scenario to picture yourself in. What we are exploring today is how a seemingly tranquil natural environment can become incredibly hostile in just the blink of an eye. We're looking at a location where geography, erratic weather patterns, and human psychology collide to create a perfect storm of mystery.
And our source material for this deep dive is this fascinating documentary transcript. It covers the enduring mysteries of a region known as the Bennington Triangle. Our mission today is to unpack the truly bizarre topography of this area, lay out the chilling timeline of disappearances that put it on the map, and really sift through the various theories behind them.
Right, trying to separate the folklore from the hard facts.
Exactly. We want to understand what is actually happening out there in the Vermont woods.
Well, to really grasp the danger of this place, we have to understand the physical space first. We are looking at a specific stretch of wilderness in Vermont, just northeast of Bennington.
Which is this quaint, picturesque college town, right?
Yes, population of about 15,000. But looming right nearby is the epicenter of our discussion, the majestic Glastonbury Mountain. It towers at 3,748 feet. And to a casual observer or a weekend hiker, it looks like a beautiful natural playground. But that inviting exterior masks a deeply treacherous landscape.
It's interesting because the ominous nickname itself, the Bennington Triangle, it sounds like something pulled from ancient forbidden texts. But it's actually a relatively modern invention.
Oh, definitely.
A Vermont writer and folklorist named Joseph Citro coined the term during a public radio broadcast back in 1992. He was just trying to give a name to this highly concentrated cluster of unsolved vanishings he'd been researching.
Right, but the dread associated with Glastonbury Mountain goes back centuries before radio ever existed. The historical context here is crucial.
Yeah, let's get into that.
Long before European settlers mapped the area, the Native American communities who lived in these lands held a deeply ingrained belief that the Glastonbury Mountain region was fundamentally cursed. Yes, it was considered a place of malevolent energy. Their oral traditions spoke of an enchanted stone hidden deep within the timber. And according to the lore, this stone acted as a trap, and it would literally engulf anyone who stepped on it, just pulling them completely out of our reality.
And what makes that ancient lore so compelling is that modern science actually backs up the terrifying, disorienting nature of these woods. The Native Americans also warned of a relentless conflict between what they called the four winds.
The shifting winds, yes.
They believed the winds were constantly fighting each other. If you picture walking into a funhouse where the floor tilts and the mirrors distort your vision, that is essentially what this environment does to your senses.
It really is.
The topography of the mountain creates extreme wind shears and microclimates. The breeze is constantly shifting direction, meaning you cannot use the wind on your face to orient yourself or figure out which way is north.
The physical toll that specific meteorological phenomenon takes on the landscape is staggering. Those shifting winds are so persistent and aggressive that they actually alter the growth patterns of the local vegetation.
Oh, right, the warped trees.
That is the scientific reason behind the trees sprouting at those bizarre, unnatural angles you mentioned earlier. The wind forces the saplings to grow askew.
That is wild.
So if you are a seasoned wilderness guide trying to read the terrain to find your way out, the environment itself is feeding you false information. Navigating this forested expanse becomes a wildly disorienting challenge because the visual cues you rely on are entirely distorted.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to really comprehend the lethality of this disorienting terrain, we have to look at the timeline. We are rewinding to the year 1897.
Over a century ago.
Vermont has just opened its first ever official deer hunting season. A 40-year-old hunter named John Harbour is out in the Glastonbury woods, presumably excited for the hunt. The forest is quiet. Suddenly, John screams out, "I've been shot!"
Just out of nowhere.
Out of nowhere. His brother and a friend are hunting nearby. They hear the scream and immediately sprint toward the sound of his voice.
Yeah.
But when they arrive at the spot where the shout came from, John is gone. He has vanished into thin air.
A frantic search begins immediately, lasting through the bitter cold of the night. It isn't until the following morning that searchers finally locate his body. He is found dead, partially concealed beneath a tree,
Right.
but the evidence at the scene presented an impossible puzzle. The forensic clues indicated that John had not been shot at the location where his body was discovered. He had been moved, or moved himself, after the fact.
And his trusty firearm was lying right next to his body, completely fully loaded. That single detail immediately shut down any initial theories of a tragic suicide.
Exactly.
He shouts that he's been shot, vanishes before his brother can reach him, and is found dead hours later in a different location with a loaded gun beside him.
It established a very dark, perplexing precedent for the region, but this baffling event was only the beginning. If we move forward to Armistice Day, November 11th, 1943, we see another highly experienced woodsman fall victim to the terrain.
Carl Herrick.
Yes, Carl is out hunting with his cousin Henry. The dense woods and dropping temperatures start to complicate their trek. At some point, the two men get separated. The sun dips below the horizon, and the first snow of a severe storm begins to fall.
A terrible time to be separated.
Absolutely. Henry manages to navigate his way back to camp. Carl does not. Henry alerts the authorities, kicking off a massive 72-hour intensive search through the freezing timber before they finally find Carl's lifeless body.
And the details of Carl's death are just as bizarre as John Harbor's. Carl's unfired rifle was located roughly 70 feet away from where he was found, but it was the autopsy that truly shocked the authorities.
It wasn't a gunshot.
No, Carl wasn't shot, and he didn't freeze to death either. The coroner determined that he suffered from immense crushing pressure. The force was so severe that it actually drove one of his ribs directly into his lung. He was effectively squeezed to death in the middle of the woods.
The investigators found massive bear-like tracks circling his lifeless form, but the mechanics of the death raised significantly more questions than it answered.
Because of the squeezing.
Exactly. A wild animal attack is always a plausible threat in the deep woods. However, a bear attack is typically a mauling. A bear does not simply squeeze a grown man to death, leave the body entirely intact without a scratch, and somehow separate the hunter from his unfired weapon by 70 feet. The physical evidence simply did not align with typical predator behavior.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because those early cases, as terrifying as they were spread out over several decades. What truly cemented the Bennington Triangle as a legendary zone of high strangeness was a sudden, violent escalation.
The cluster.
Yeah. Between 1945 and 1950, this relatively small geographical footprint became the site of 5 entirely baffling disappearances. This is the cluster that put Glastonbury Mountain on the map.
5 disappearances in a 5-year window in an isolated area is an unprecedented statistical anomaly. And the sequence began with a victim who possessed the exact skill set required to survive the mountain.
Matty Rivers.
In November 1945, a 74-year-old man named Matty Rivers was walking a familiar trail with his son-in-law. Matty was a highly respected, expert outdoorsman and a local wilderness guide.
He knew those woods.
Better than anyone. They approach a fork in the path. Matty casually mentions he is going to take a quick detour and will catch up shortly. He walks down the diverging path and is never seen again. Authorities and volunteers scoured the vast wilderness for weeks.
And they found almost nothing.
The entire yield of that massive search operation was a single rifle cartridge found in a stream.
Losing a local guide was shocking, but the disappearance that occurred the very next year is the one that caught the attention of the entire nation. It's 1946. Paula Welden is a 19-year-old sophomore studying at Bennington College. It is a Sunday afternoon in late fall, and she decides she wants to take a solo hike on the Long Trail.
And for context, the Long Trail is this rugged 250-mile path through the state that was completed back in 1930.
Right. She leaves the college campus around 2:45 p.m.
The timeline of her departure and her lack of preparation proved to be a fatal combination. When she sets out, the weather is a mild 50 degrees. She's wearing nothing but jeans and a bright red coat.
Just a red coat for a mountain hike in late fall.
What she likely failed to anticipate was the aggressive temperature drop typical of mountain microclimates. Overnight, the weather was forecasted to plummet into the single digits, accompanied by violent gusty winds.
And multiple people actually spot her as she makes her way toward the mountain. She's seen running near a gravel pit. She successfully gets a hitchhike closer to the trailhead, and at 3:45 p.m., she runs into a local man named Ernie Whitman.
He tried to warn her.
He did. Ernie takes one look at her light clothing and issues a stark warning. He tells her she is not dressed for the terrain and points out that the sun is going down in exactly 35 minutes. Despite the warnings, she presses on into the darkening trail and completely vanishes.
When she failed to return to her dorm, the aftermath was pure chaos. Her roommate, Elizabeth, raised the alarm. The president of Bennington College immediately got involved. Paula's father, W. Archibald Welden, rushed up from Connecticut and took matters into his own hands.
He had to. The local response wasn't great.
He organized a massive multi-state search effort. He put up a staggering $5,000 reward of his own money, which translates to roughly $78,000 today.
You had law enforcement from neighboring states, local volunteers, trackers, an army of people combing every inch of that mountain, and they turned up absolutely nothing. No red coat, no footprints, no clues.
The historical impact of Paula Welden's disappearance cannot be overstated. The local law enforcement's response was widely criticized as disorganized and ineffective.
Yeah, people were furious.
The sheer public frustration over this botched search effort directly catalyzed a massive structural change in the state's government. It led to the official creation of the Vermont State Police the very next year. Specifically so, the state would have a centralized force to handle massive crises in the wilderness.
It is wild to think that a single unsolved mystery changed the literal infrastructure of a state. But the mountain wasn't finished. Exactly 3 years later, in 1949, the newly formed state police faced a case that played out like a classic locked room mystery.
James Tedford.
Yeah, James Tedford, an older veteran, boards a bus in St. Albans to head back to Bennington. We have multiple independent witnesses who confirm seeing him get on the bus. Passengers even confirmed seeing him sitting in his seat at the second-to-last stop before town.
Right.
But when that bus finally pulled into the Bennington station, James was gone. His luggage was still in the racks, and an open bus schedule was sitting on his empty seat. He vanished into thin air somewhere along a moving highway route.
While the locked room aspect is compelling, this specific case is a brilliant exercise in critical thinking regarding investigative timelines. James Tedford was actually not reported missing for over a week.
Over a week?
Yes. His family in Bennington assumed he had simply delayed his departure, while the folks in St. Albans assumed he had arrived safely. By the time investigators finally realized he was missing and began interviewing those bus passengers, a significant amount of time had passed.
So their memories might not be perfect.
We have to view those witness statements through the lens of human memory fallibility. The passengers may have genuinely believed they saw him at the second-to-last stop, but their memories could have easily been conflated with a different leg of the journey.
But the very next year, in 1950, there is absolutely no room to blame memory fallibility. It is Columbus Day. An 8-year-old boy named Paul Jepson is riding in a truck with his mother as she goes to relocate some pigs.
This is a tragic case.
She parks the truck, tells Paul to wait in the cab for just a few minutes, and walks off. Paul is wearing a highly visible bright red jacket. When she returns to the truck moments later, the cab is empty. Her son is completely gone.
The response was immediate. There was no week-long delay here. The New Hampshire State Police were brought in, and they deployed highly trained bloodhounds to track the boy's scent. This is where the geography of these disparate cases begins to overlap in a truly chilling way.
The hounds tracked him.
The bloodhounds picked up Paul's trail, followed it deep into the woods, and stopped dead at the exact geographic location where Paula Welden had last been seen before she vanished 4 years prior. The dogs simply lost the scent in the middle of the trail.
The exact same spot on the mountain. And just like Paula, little Paul Jepson was never found. Then, incredibly, just weeks later in October 1950, the mountain claimed its 5th victim in this cluster.
Frida Langer.
Frida Langer, a highly experienced hiker, is out in the woods with her cousin. She slips and falls into a shallow creek. Soaking wet and freezing, she tells her cousin to wait there. She says that she is going to jog the short distance back to their camp, put on dry clothes, and come right back.
And she never makes it.
Never makes it to camp. Massive search parties scoured the specific grid she was jogging through. They find nothing. The twist comes the following spring, when the snow finally melts. Frida's lifeless body is suddenly discovered 3 miles away from the creek.
And the most perplexing detail of Frida Langer's discovery is the location itself. Her remains were found sitting in an open area that had already been intensely, thoroughly searched by massive teams of volunteers the previous autumn.
So it was like she was placed there later,
It was as if she had been placed there after the fact. Because her remains had been exposed to the elements for over 6 months, the coroner was completely unable to determine a cause of death. It remains officially undetermined.
So what does this all mean? We have an experienced woodsman, a college sophomore, a veteran on a bus, an 8-year-old boy, and an expert hiker. 5 people with completely different backgrounds, all vanishing into the same small geographical void within a 5-year window.
When you lay all the data points out and synthesize the timeline, a few striking patterns emerge. First, every single one of these 5 disappearances occurred in the final quarter of the year between October and December.
Okay.
Second, the vanishings all took place in the late afternoon, specifically in that golden hour window between 3:00 p.m. and 5:00 p.m. as the sun is starting to set.
And we cannot ignore the eerie coincidence regarding the victor's clothing. Both 19-year-old Paula Welden and 8-year-old Paul Jepson were wearing highly visible bright red jackets when they disappeared.
Yes, the red jackets.
In a small town reeling from these tragedies, that specific detail sparked a massive local superstition. The residents began to believe that wearing the color red in the Glastonbury woods would actively draw ill fortune toward you.
Human psychology naturally seeks an antagonist when presented with a string of tragedies. It is much easier to process a cluster of missing persons if you can blame a serial killer.
Sure, gives you a face to fear.
But logically, that theory falls apart under minimal scrutiny. A predatory serial killer almost always operates with a highly specific victim profile. But look at the demographics of our victims. A 74-year-old male, a 19-year-old female, an elderly veteran, an 8-year-old child, and a middle-aged woman.
They have nothing in common.
The ages, genders, physical capabilities, and the specific circumstances of their disappearances are entirely inconsistent with the behavioral patterns of a single human predator.
If we rule out a serial killer, we have to look directly at the landscape itself. We already discussed the shifting 4 winds that distort the vegetation and destroy your sense of direction. But the Glastonbury Mountain area is also riddled with hidden, man-made hazards.
The terrain is incredibly dangerous.
The woods are full of old, forgotten logging wells, deep mine shafts, abandoned root cellars, and natural cave systems overgrown by brush. If you are lost, panicking, and the sun drops at 4:30 in the afternoon, one wrong step off the path could mean plummeting into a void. And then you have to factor in the brutal reality of the plunging temperatures.
And those plunging temperatures trigger a very specific, devastating biological response. When a person is suffering from the later stages of severe hypothermia, they often experience a delirious psychological phenomenon known to medical professionals as terminal burrowing.
Terminal burrowing.
As the brain shuts down, it tricks the victim into seeking out incredibly small enclosed spaces for refuge. To a freezing, disoriented hiker, the dark opening of a deep mine shaft or an abandoned root cellar doesn't look like a trap. It looks like a warm, safe sanctuary.
Oh, wow.
They physically squeeze themselves deep into these tiny, hidden crevices. By doing so, they inadvertently make it virtually impossible for search parties and tracking dogs to ever locate them.
It is a profoundly tragic explanation, but it makes so much logical sense when you look at the harsh realities of the wilderness. Of course, human nature hates an information vacuum. Because authorities couldn't locate the bodies and provide closure, the fringe theories flooded in to fill the gap.
They always do.
You had locals blaming UFOs, complex alien abduction scenarios, and even a mythical Sasquatch-like creature they creatively dubbed the Bennington Monster. When people don't have forensic facts, they comfort themselves with the supernatural.
While the sheer frequency of these events undeniably dropped off after that terrifying 5-year stretch ended in 1950, the woods certainly did not stop claiming victims. The danger never actually left the mountain. In 1981, 3 hunters walked into the Glastonbury woods and vanished without leaving a single trace behind.
And the psychological toll of the area is still very real today. In 2008, a 27-year-old music composition teacher at Bennington College named Robert Singley decided to hike out into the wilderness.
A very risky decision.
He specifically navigated to the exact spot where Paula Welden had vanished decades earlier, with the intention of sitting in nature and composing a string quartet.
Tempting fate in that manner almost cost him his life. As he packed up to head back to his car, a thick, rolling fog rapidly descended on the mountain. He immediately lost his bearings. The sun set, plunging the woods into darkness. He had no map, no compass, no GPS device, and in a stroke of terrible luck, his headlamp broke.
He was completely stranded in the freezing dark.
He managed to survive the harrowing night, but his subsequent account of the ordeal is deeply unsettling. He reported that the silence in the woods was absolute and deafening, lacking normal wildlife sounds.
It's dead quiet.
He sought shelter near a large tree that he explicitly claimed emanated a haunting energy. When the sun finally rose the next morning, he stated that the terrain looked entirely foreign, as if the physical landscape had shifted overnight while he was huddled in the dark.
He was incredibly lucky to walk out of those woods. But tragically, that old, unsettling curse of the color red has seemingly returned to the Bennington Triangle in recent years. In the summer of 2019, a woman named Jessica Hildenbrandt was found dead in a gravel pit within the triangle's borders.
And her nickname.
Her widely used nickname, she went by Red. A man named Devin Moffat was eventually charged with her murder. Then 2 summers later in 2021, a man named Joseph Schoenig went missing for 2 weeks in the area. He was eventually located dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound, sitting inside his parked truck deep within the triangle. The color of his truck was bright red.
The through line of that color is undeniably eerie, but it highlights a profound difference between the tragedies of the modern era and the infamous mid-century cases. Today, investigators utilize advanced DNA analysis, meticulous forensics, and digital tracking technology.
We get answers now.
We eventually get logical, albeit incredibly tragic, answers to what happened out there. But those mid-century disappearances remain an absolute, enduring void. The answers are still out there, swallowed by the mountain.
Exploring these cases serves as a deeply humbling reminder for anyone who loves the outdoors. It illustrates exactly how quickly a familiar, picturesque afternoon hike can devolve into a disorienting, lethal nightmare. We surround ourselves with technology and like to believe we have conquered the wild, but the raw, indifferent power of nature does not care about your experience level or your cell phone signal.
That is the ultimate takeaway from the Bennington Triangle. Thorough knowledge and meticulous preparation are absolute necessities when you step past the tree line. But this specific stretch of Vermont proves that sometimes, despite all your expertise and survival gear, the environment itself simply holds all the cards.
You know, thinking about the medical reality of terminal burrowing and the fact that there are hundreds of uncharted, forgotten mine shafts and root cellars hidden just beneath the soil of Glastonbury Mountain, it casts all those old folklore tales into really grim light.
It really does.
Next time you hear a campfire story about someone being spirited away by a monster in the woods or beamed up into the sky by a UFO, ask yourself a different question. What if they didn't go up into the sky at all? What if they are perfectly preserved, resting silently in the dark, just a few feet beneath the boots of the very hikers looking for them? Something to think about next time you go for a walk in the woods. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll catch you next time.